teach anybody to be a farmer. It's a process. You dig a hole, you put a seed in, you put dirt on top, add water, up comes the corn. You could learn that. Now comes the information economy. It's built around replacing people with technology. The skill sets that you have to learn are how to think and analyze. And that is a whole degree level different. You have to have a different skill set. You have to have a lot more gray matter.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. I need somebody with arms strong enough to wrestle a calf and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon and mean it. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay, wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds and yet stop in midfield and race to help when he sees the first smoke from a neighbor's place. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners, somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk and replenish the self-feeder and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
Hey, we've been in a series on remaining faithful. What does it mean to remain faithful? What's at stake? And we looked at the fact that the Apostle Paul would encourage his understudy, Timothy, to remain faithful. And he did that in 2 Timothy while he's in prison. He writes and he tells them that all of these other people have, they signed up for a season. They trusted Christ and they were traveling this road and they had gifts and abilities and they did that for a season, but then the road became too treacherous. It became too difficult. And they thought better of it to do something else. And so Paul lists names. He names names of people who are sidelined and who are no longer carrying forth the message of life. And he tells Timothy, but you remember what I've taught you. And to encourage him, to motivate him to stay the course, he used 3 illustrations of 3 different groups of people that we've looked at. He used the soldier, he used the athlete, and this morning he's going to use the farmer. It's interesting, when I looked, and I've been thinking about this and working on it for several weeks, I was thinking, the Apostle John, the youngest apostle, would warn his readers to beware of the world, the flesh, and the devil. And it's interesting as I've thought about it, and nobody smart said this, so I figured I'd say it. It's interesting that these 3 images that Paul gives in Timothy combat those conversely. So the soldiers to take the armor of God to thwart off the darts of the devil. And the athlete is supposed to go and train himself and go against everything that his or her body tells him to do, because winning the race is worth it, to battle against the flesh. And then this one, the farmer, is connected to the world. The word farmer literally means of the dirt. It means somebody who connects with the dirt. That very first part of the clip, I hoped you would remember that the Republican/Democrat, because he's been both of those, Michael Bloomberg, in 2016 made that statement that it took more gray matter to do the new economy than it did being a farmer. And of course, it's easy to pick on farmers. In Jesus' day, there were probably 80 to 90% of the people did some sort of farming, either with the land and crops or with the livestock. Today, it's around 2%. 2% of the population is responsible for the food that you and I get. So this morning, what I'd like to do is I would like us to look at this last illustration, and I think it's pretty fitting that we're doing this on Labor Day. We're going to talk about the people who really labor. So let's look at what Paul says in Timothy, tells Timothy, and I want to look at 4 aspects of this. He says the hard-working farmer, because I guess there's farmers that are not hard-working. Now, I don't know any. My brush with farming was when I lived with my uncle, that recently passed away. We would plant some things, and, I was just green as all get out. I just thought things popped up in the supermarket. I don't know. I just thought that's what happened. I can remember one time when I was little, I wanted to buy a pack of radishes, and since they were like a nickel or something, I was 6 or 7 years old. Mom let me get the radishes, and I went out in the backyard and I just threw them out there, and then I forgot about them. Well, I can remember just several weeks later, which felt like an eternity to a 7-year-old, I looked out there and there were actually radishes growing. And I can remember I grabbed these and I brought them into Dad. And my dad made such a big deal out of it that we were eating homegrown radishes. Now, we hated radishes, but it was something that would grow. And I'll never forget that. I felt so proud, and I hadn't even really done anything. And that was my conception of farming. I think God put my uncle on this earth to bust that conception, and boy, he did. We had potatoes, and we had to dig potatoes. And I sat there, and I did most of the thinking. I did a Michael Bloomberg type of thinking about how do I get these potatoes out of the ground? I knew they were in there. And the only way to get them out of the ground was to work. I didn't want to do that. It was to work. And he uses this term here, hard-working farmer. And the idea is not just the effort that he puts in, but this word encompasses what the person feels like after the effort has been put in. The idea of this word is not just the effort he's putting forth, but it's after that person has put forth that effort, what is their state of being? And this is total exhaustion. This person just wants to just fall into bed, if they can even make it to bed. That's the idea he's drawing here for Timothy. He's saying the hardworking farmer, the one who is completely exhausted. In fact, there's another word we use here, weary. And it's interesting that Jesus say this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." That was a word that was linked to farming. So the hardworking person, the person that's at the total point of exhaustion, that person, that farmer, should be the first to receive a share of the crops. And here's what I love what he says about this. He says, reflect on what I'm saying. So as he's talked about the soldier and the athlete and the farmer, he wants us just to stay with us, to think about it, to reflect about it. And as I've been doing that, there's 4 things, there's more than 4 things, but there's 4 things I thought was important to at least just point out. A farmer lives and works by faith. A farmer lives and works by faith. There are no guarantees. You think about what a farmer is up against. A farmer is up against weeds. He's up against the weather. You know, there are absolutely no guarantee. He can have a crop coming in, and it look great, and then a hurricane or storm comes through and destroys all of it. There's no guarantees. He has to work by faith. He is ultimately dependent upon God. I find this interesting, especially when you think about, as I think about the nation of Israel, the distinction between Israel and Egypt. In Egypt, all you need to do is just lift your pants leg up. The water just comes up from the ground. The rivers flood, and that's what brings soil and nutrients to the ground. In Israel, it's a different animal. The weather system is a different animal. If you're farming, you're constantly looking up for rain. You're constantly looking towards the heavens for rain. And that's what a farmer's doing. A farmer is at the mercy of all kinds of variables that he cannot control. And so the Apostle Paul would tell his understudy, hey, remember as a hardworking farmer that you live and work by faith. There are no guarantees. We want guarantees. We want to make sure that our bank accounts are guaranteed up to the federal government is going to guarantee it. You know, we want all of these guarantees. We want a 1-year warranty or a 3-year warranty. But for the farmer, there's no guarantees. Secondly, a farmer works in isolation. When you think about the soldier, as he's warring and as he's training, he has a band of brothers with him. There's some encouragement there. When you think about the athlete, as the athlete runs, there's a crowd that's cheering them on. Even in training, he's got or she's got someone that's encouraging them, showing them how to perfect their art and their athletic abilities. But the farmer gets up before sunrise. I do know about this. I did pull tobacco, and I thought this was crazy getting up at 5 a.m. before sunrise to be out there in the field. A farmer, he works in isolation, and not during the harvest so much, but especially during the time of the season where he has to plant, where he has to repair the machinery. He works alone. There's so much alone time. He works alone and nobody sees, but God sees. God sees all the effort that he puts forth. But even though, as I thought about this, even though he works in isolation a lot of the time, he is not isolated. And what I mean by that is the Apostle Paul would say this. He would write to the Corinthian church, and here's what he would say. He would say, what after all is Apollos? Because they're naming names. They're going, you know, this person influenced me, and I'm of this preacher, I'm of that preacher. And he says, what after all is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. In other words, the Lord has assigned Apollos his job. He's assigned Paul his job. And through that, you came to believe. God puts a whole team out to redeem people. But each individual farmer, each individual minister so often works in isolation. But he's not isolated. He said, Paul says, I planted the seed. Apollos watered it. But God has been making it grow. God has been working behind the scenes to take what I did and what Apollos did and to bring it together so that the Corinthians could grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. He would use this illustration of a farmer, and it would encourage us that even though there are times where we work alone, even though there are things that we do and nobody ever sees, God sees. But we need to understand that we are part of a bigger entity that's happening. We're part of something bigger that's moving forward. A farmer lives by and works by faith. A farmer works in isolation, but he's not isolated. Thirdly, a farmer works in concert with the rhythm of life. What I mean by that is this. If you're a farmer and you wake up and say, August, and you say, man, I feel like going out and planting something. I'm gonna go plant. I think I'm gonna plant tobacco in August. That's not going to work out. If you think that you can determine when you do what you do, you won't last very long as a farmer. There's a show that at least 2 families in this church, who shall not be named, the Weeks and the Edwards, told me, you got to watch this show. It's called Clarkston Farm. And it's on Prime. And I can't do it. I've tried. And this is great. I said, no, it's a disaster movie. It is disaster after disaster after disaster. This guy is going to try to farm. He's got so much money, he's going to try to farm. So he goes, and I could only watch 2 episodes, and then I said, I can't do it anymore. I just can't. He goes, and because he's got money, he wants the best tractor. Just give me the best tractor. He gets the biggest and best tractor. It can't even fit in the barn. But it has nothing to do with the crops he's growing. The 2 are just separated. He could have used a little gray matter there, to help him decide what he needed. But all in all, he's sitting there working. He's going, oh man, why? It's like you're banging your head against the wall, and these things need not be. There is a rhythm. There's a season that farmers know. And what they've done is they've bent their lives to the season rather than demand that the season bend its lives to them. We are living a day and a time where everybody thinks that everything bends to them. And today, some of the most stupid, and I think I can say asinine, I don't think that's a bad word, thoughts are out there and are taken as serious. So, for instance, debt. You can see it on Late Night, How to Get Rich, and our whole government saying, well, we got to spend our way to prosperity. We got to borrow our way to prosperity. No, you can keep trying to do that, but it's not going to work. There are things, there are seasons, there's a rhythm that happens in life, and you either knock your head against that or you get in line with that. And a farmer understands that. He understands that there are things that are going to happen and when they need to happen. And look, he would love to watch the Super Bowl. He would love to watch the Final Four. He would love to do these things and go on vacation, but he can't. Because the season demands he do what he does when he needs to do it. The farmer understands that. Timothy needed to understand that. That Timothy, you missed this. It's like, okay, we just got to wait a whole year. We have a cow that loses a calf. We're going to have to wait a whole year now. A farmer has such a realistic view of life. And I think what Paul is doing to Timothy, he's shaking him. And he says, you need to be faithful. You need to understand that this is not the only work that demands that it's inconvenient at times for us to do things. Because this work matters. And I think with the farmer, he's saying, work with the rhythm of life. You don't decide when to plant on your timetable. You know the earth. You know the season. You're wise. You have gray matter. And you go along with that. And sometimes it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient. I can tell you, pulling tobacco, I did not want to get up and be out in the field at 5 in the morning. I didn't think anybody that had any sanity about them would do that. But around 11 o'clock, when we were still pulling and getting it into the barn, I was so glad we had done it at the cool time of the morning. When I had to get up in the barn, and because I was tall, and I didn't want to be the first one in the barn, like the first curing that happened because of snakes and things, and you hear horror stories about that, and I'd tear that barn all to pieces if I got up there and saw a snake. But once the first curing did it, then I was tall enough to get up in the barn. I was so glad. Whew, I'm glad I got here at 5 o'clock. You know when the farmer is glad that he got up and he planted in March and in April and did all the work that he did, he's glad about that at harvest time. And that's the fourth point. Why does he do it? For the hope of the harvest. A farmer works with the ultimate goal of a harvest to be enjoyed. And for him, it's a hope of a harvest. Because like I said, there's no guarantees. Storms can come through. A drought can happen. There's no guarantees. But this is the difference. Go back to the 2 Timothy verse. He does it to receive a share of the crops. What's interesting here is that Timothy's investment in people is guaranteed. That harvest is guaranteed. And the reason I know that is because after this, I don't have the verses up here because we looked at them 3-4 weeks ago. After this, he talks about Jesus' faithfulness. Because Jesus is going to be faithful. He's going to be faithful to the soldier who is prepared. He's going to be faithful to the athlete who's trained. And he's going to be faithful to the farmer who through toilsome work has aligned his life with the rhythm of the seasons for a harvest. He's going to be faithful to that. I also find it interesting here that the farmer should be the first to receive a share of the crops. You know, in some countries, that's not what happens. That's not what happens at all. One of the things I don't have this on the top of right in my back pocket, but when I was at Hillsdale, one of the huge Supreme Court decisions that happened was over farming. And they were trying to make it where you could only plant so many crops. And so a farmer, I think it was in Ohio, that would have been like half of the crops he normally plants. So he planted all of his crops. He planted, I think, the full 22 acres. And he sold the 11 acres to, on the market. And he was keeping the other 11 acres for himself. This thing ended up going to the Supreme Court. Thousands and thousands of dollars spent. And the Supreme Court said he had violated the law for planting a certain crop, on his property and for his use. The Supreme Court needed to read this right here. This was back in the 40s. See, in communism and socialism, what you end up having is you have the farmer work and he gives it to everybody and he hopes he can get something back. But here, the promise is, hey, when you grow a crop, you get the share of it. You get the first share of it. And I think what he's telling Timothy here, and one of the things I have found to be true, is when you stand as a minister, when you stand as a teacher, when you study God's Word as a teacher, and you're studying it so you can share with others, what ends up happening is God gives you something. He gives you something first. God still needs farmers. Not only in the literal physical sense, but also in the spiritual sense. People that see that the fields are white to harvest. People that see that the world needs saving. People that will be uncomfortable and get out of their comfort zone. And make a move to realize that people need Christ. People that need to be faithful and be reminded of faithfulness. Because a harvest is coming. And it's guaranteed. And that's why I titled this, In Hope of the Harvest. What Paul tells Timothy to do and what he encourages us to do is work because a harvest is coming. And you can't get all excited in October and say, okay, I'm ready to be a farmer and to grow. Let's go harvest some. No, there's all of the work that happens beforehand. And it's in the beforehand that we get discouraged. and we want to quit. But don't short circuit that. God's going to use the soldier that prepares. He's going to use the athlete that prepares. He's going to use the farmer that prepares to give us a great hereafter. These are the rewards that He gives to us. So why do we farm? In hopes of a harvest. I hope you know a farmer. I know a farmer or two. If you've ever sat and talked with a farmer, there's just something about, there's wisdom. And part of me hurts for someone like a Michael Bloomberg. I mean, and I'm not joking here. It really does. Somebody who is so wealthy that they've never sat and gained the wisdom of somebody who's lived life in the seasons of life, in the rhythm of life. And I think Paul Harvey's description of that is spot on. Spot on. On the 8th day, God made a farmer. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you give us pictures in your word to encourage us. Pictures of the soldier who puts on his armor to please his commander, who fights the forces of evil and stands against the forces of evil that would try to take us out. For the athlete who prepares time and time again to run the race. For the investment of all that they are to run that race and meet that finish line to win that prize. And for the farmer whose whole life is wrapped up in the land, who knows your goodness and your bounty through prayer and through constantly having to look to you, who has to have a heart dependent upon you and the way you've ordered the world to work. Father, I pray that we would live our lives from the standpoint of a harvest that's yet to come, that you have guaranteed with your character. For it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Hi, friends. I'm Olivia.
I'm Rod.
And you're listening to Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church. In today's episode, we are covering the September 1st sermon titled In Hope of the Harvest. And this is the concluding sermon in our series on some illustrations that Paul gives to Timothy about how to live the Christian life. So first we have the soldier, then we have the athlete, and this past sermon was on the farmer.
Yeah, and more directly, how to be faithful, how to remain faithful in the midst of trying times.
And one of the things that you brought out in this was how different these examples are. Sometimes in Scripture, especially like in the Proverbs and stuff, they'll give, line A and line B builds off of line A. So it gives a further example, or it flushes out a little better line A. And then you have line C, which builds off of that. So then you really get a full picture. With this, the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer, as you pointed out, they have different struggles, different areas of growth that's happening with them, different ways that they prepare, and different outcomes.
Yes.
So how is the farmer, as Paul uses it, an illustration of a faithful Christian life?
The farmer, what really struck me about that was how often he works in isolation. I mean, the soldier, you hear the term band of brothers. You become a family, a unit, and you work together to accomplish a goal. an athlete, when he is competing and in training, he's going to be with a small group of people that's going to give him pointers or her pointers and things like that. But when he competes, it's going to be in front of a big crowd, and so that gets your adrenaline pumping and everything. The farmer really operates in the downtime of there's not a lot of people around. There's his family. And one of the things I found out while researching this is, probably 80 to 90% of the culture back in Paul's day was doing some type of farming, either livestock or crops or some type of what you would call agricultural farming engagement. Those were lonely times, as far as individuals doing that type of work. Today, there's somewhere around 2%. I'll tell you, I didn't use this in my sermon. There are times when I drive into the parking lot that I know God really wants me to preach this sermon. And I pulled in, and in the entrance of our church, there was all kinds of trash that had been dumped. There was Bojangle boxes everywhere. And because I was bringing trash to the church anyway, I just stopped the car, and I was sitting there picking up trash. And I was just remembering, God sees this. This is something that needs to be done. This is something, it would be fun to get out there with a group of people and do that task, but it's lonely. And I was right away reminded of the farmer who does his work, who labors and no one sees, but God sees. God sees his faithfulness. God sees that he's bending his life towards the things that need to be done. He doesn't get to set his schedule. His schedule is set for him by the seasons, and we talked about that in the sermon. So, the farmer's very, very different. And I think the biggest difference is he works to the point of weariness, exhaustion, total exhaustion, and he works in isolation. But I came in behind that just because we feel isolated, it doesn't mean in the scheme of things that we are, because God's using us to play a part. And I think that's what Paul was telling the Corinthians in chapter 3, that he did his part, Apollo did his part, but ultimately God is the one who gives the increase. So the farmer, I'll tell you, this series surprisingly has affected me as I've reflected and continue to reflect on the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer. And the farmers are so looked down upon. Even in my video clip where Michael Bloomberg said, it's going to take more gray matter to do the new economy. No, it's just different gray matter. I would challenge Bloomberg or anyone to go out there and you try to do farming. You try to do it. And so I think there are a lot of times that people, they don't hold this occupation in high regard. And all of those feelings, I think, are mixed in with the minister who's laboring, who feels alone, but who ultimately does it for the harvest.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned was how the farmer doesn't get the immediate result of the work. There's a time for planting, and the harvest is not the next day.
Exactly.
You have to wait, and you can't do anything else. You've done all that you can do. You've done it to the best of your ability, and now you really just wait and see. And in the same way, I'm sure in ministry, you do it to the best of your ability, but you don't get the immediate, something that lights up to say, oh yeah, it's stuck over here and things like that. So it is that kind of just patience, I guess.
I'll tell you something. If you talk to ministers, they'll tell you they like cutting the grass. And the reason they like cutting the grass is because they start something and an hour later, 2 hours later, it's done. And they can look and they say, I've made a difference. Farming is slow work. Ministry is slow work. You invest, you plow, you till, you plant, you wait. And you might not, you might not ever see it on this side of eternity, that harvest that is due you. But God looks at the effort. He counts the effort.
It reminds me of a few weeks ago when you had Floyd, which we mentioned on the podcast, tell that story of 30 or 40 years ago, those seeds were planted, and only now was he able to see the harvest, really. And
really understand the impact he had made. It was so encouraging to him that God had used him to make a difference in those people's lives.
So one of the questions that I had that came up because of the sermon was when we were looking in 2 Timothy, it mentions that the farmer should have the first share of the crop. And you mentioned that there was a court case in the United States that basically goes against this.
Yes, and it changed everything. It basically gave the federal government unlimited powers. Let me just say this. I did not plan on saying that. What I was planning on saying, this kind of behind the scenes, it struck me from the standpoint of communism, socialism. And I said, this definitely goes against socialism because they want you to work, put everything in a common basket, and then you take it. But Paul tells Timothy the farmer should receive the first of the crop, the first share of the crop. And I remembered when I was at Hillsdale College this summer taking a course on the Constitution, there was a famous Supreme Court case called Wickert versus Filburn, 1942 court case. And you have this situation to where Roscoe Filburn in Ohio, he is given allotment from the federal government to grow 11.9 acres of wheat. Well, he has 23 acres, and he went on and grew 23 acres of wheat. And he used the other 12.1 acres of wheat. He didn't sell it or anything like that because they were not wanting to disrupt the market. They want to keep prices at a certain sustainable level for people, and that's their motivation. But he wasn't crossing any state lines to sell that other wheat or anything like that. He used it for his own cattle. He used it, for his own farm. And the Supreme Court ended up ruling against him. After several years, they ruled against him, and the reason they said that is that he ended up using wheat that he would have been forced to buy had he not grown it. He would have had to come to the market to buy the wheat he'd already grown. And so I just thought of this right in the middle of my sermon. This verse clearly speaks against that. And I will tell you this particularly court case, and let's link to it. I'll link to an article about this court case. It had far-reaching ramifications on the administrative state and how much power the federal government has, because it came in under the Commerce Clause and it said, no, you've messed up, and it fined him, I think 49 cents a bushel or something like that. This guy, it was his property. It was his effort, and yet he didn't get to enjoy them. And that's a direct contrast to what Paul was telling Timothy about. The farmer, common sense tells you the farmer gets to enjoy his crops first. And I think by application, when we study the Word of God to share it with others, there's something that happens. We get fed the Word of God first. We get to enjoy that. And I think by illustration or example, that's the way this passage leans to where Paul would encourage you, do the work of the farmer. You're going to enjoy what you get out of this work. Because, look, ultimately, it's about the harvest. What the farmer does in January, February, and March is all with an eye towards the harvest.
A few weeks ago, you mentioned how when you're thinking about what to do a sermon on, it changes you first. And you know that if it impacts you, if the story hits you, then it's going to translate well.
I'm excited to share it at that point.
Right. So is there anything else as we wrap up this sermon series and in this sermon in particular, is there anything just one more thing?
Yeah, I think that what really comes through this passage in 2 Timothy chapter 2 is the faithfulness of Jesus. If the soldier will just prepare, if the athlete will just train, if the farmer will just work tirelessly, Jesus puts his stamp that he is faithful. He is going to come through. He's going to show up. You don't have to worry about, is it going to be worth it? It is going to be worth it to the soldier, to the athlete, to the farmer. I think the farmer will end up saying, why didn't I sow more? Well, if I'd have just known the harvest was going to be this great, why didn't I sow more? The athlete, will ask himself, why didn't I train harder? And the soldier will say, why didn't I prepare for that battle even more so? Because the victory and the finish line and the harvest, they are guaranteed. And I think I made a statement in my sermon. They are guaranteed based on the character of Jesus. And when has Jesus ever lied to us? And so that's our hope. That's why we do what we do, in hope of the harvest. It's not because the harvest is not going to come, but everything we do will be realized when we are with Him.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for explaining that, and especially the court case. And as you said, we'll link to that. So if people want to read into that and the implications of that, then we'll have that for them. So thank you for explaining that. And thank you all for listening to another episode of Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church.